it really as more folks come on in to our webinar. All right, well, I'm going to start things off, and I want to welcome you to the webinar this afternoon, unless depending upon where you are in the world, also a very good morning and a very good evening. My name is Francesca Purcell, and I am senior lecturer and on the faculty co-chair of higher education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Welcome to Education Now, a webinar series designed to respond to the dramatic changes in the field of education in the continuing wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. In today's conversation, we're going to be discussing the increasing focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging on college and university campuses, and look at how existing and newly established offices and roles can stimulate meaningful and wide-ranging changes throughout campus cultures. Today's episode is being recorded. You can visit hgse.me/ednow for recordings and information about future episodes. Please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you will also find closed caption access there. So now I have the great joy in welcoming our guests, all leaders in doing the work of advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging throughout their respective campuses. With us today, we have Sherry Charleston, who is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Harvard University. Stephanie Pinder-Amaker is the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer and Founding Director of the College Mental Health Program at McLean Hospital. She is also the author of a new book called Did That Just Happen? Beyond Diversity, Creating Sustainable and Inclusive Organizations. And Richard Reddick, who is the Associate Dean for Equity, Community Engagement, and Outreach at the College of Education at the University of Texas, Austin. And also, Rich is a doctoral alum at HGSC. So welcome, Sherry, Stephanie, and Rich. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. So let's just get right into it. And Sherry, I think let's go ahead and start with you. So can you share with us how, as an institutional leader in this work, you think about framing DEIB broadly, and think about what are the goals of this work that you're trying to advance, as well as the underlying needs and challenges posed by this moment?
No, it's a great question. First, of course, thank you, Francesca, and to the rest of the organizers for this. This is a fascinating, this is, I think, going to be a very fun conversation with some wonderful colleagues. And so I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we're having today. So when people ask me, what is it, what is the nature of the work that we do? I say at its core, our goal at this juncture is really cultural change. And how are we thinking about cultural change and leading cultural change within an institution that is the oldest institution in the country? Is a very complex question, because it's a culture that obviously has sustained itself on many pillars, one of those being excellence for many, many years. And our goal is to think about how we talk about diversity and inclusion as the true pathway to Harvard's continued excellence. So inclusion and diversity not being an additional piece, but really core to the mission of the work that we do. And it's the way that we think that we'll continue to contribute to the world. So when we talk about culture, and I mentioned our goal is really cultural change, we're talking about two things: structures and habits. So our job is to create conditions where a desirable culture, or the desirable culture, the desired culture, becomes both self-sustaining and self-reinforcing. So the point that I was making before about us having a 400-year-old culture that has sustained itself over time, our goal is to think about aspirationally, what is the culture that we want to achieve, and how do we want to make it self-reinforcing? In order for us to do that, we have to develop better structures in order to promote better habits. So we've taken inclusive excellence as a framework to help us think through how we develop better structures. And for us, when we talk about inclusive excellence, it's really and a network that unifies all of our diversity, equity, our inclusion, our belonging, our anti-racism initiatives into a strategic framework that really encompasses all of our efforts here on campus with the goal of assembling the widest possible pool of talent. So when we're talking about inclusive excellence, we're talking about not only our recruitment and retention initiatives, we're talking about creating a culture that fosters actual action around diversity, inclusion, and accountability, creating an environment that really allows us to maximize potential and create an environment where everyone feels that they can thrive. And then, as I mentioned, really creating the structures in place that allow all of our efforts really to be integrated into the fabric of all of our programs, policies, practices, and curricula. So, at its core, what we're really working towards is creating the Harvard that we know that we can be, but really trying to think in structural terms about how we create a sustainable infrastructure that's going to outlast our current efforts. At the same time that we're to get to the second part of your question, which is how are we responding to the current demands of the moment, thinking about how we create both proactive and reactive strategies. So we've seen over the last year any number of things that have tested us. And what we're grappling with is how do we both think proactively about sustainable change and structural change for the institution that allows us to really turn the corner and both take stock and leverage the current moment at the same time that we're responding to the very real community needs that emerged in the moment. So we're grappling with all of those things now at the same time and trying to do so in a way that allows us to really make strategic and structural change over time.
Great, thanks, Shay. It's a really helpful way to sort of frame this work very broadly. Rich, let me turn to you, and if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about, in your mind, how do you think about what it means to be an inclusive community? What does that truly look like and feel like in your view? And is there a vision that you can sort of share with us that you have on this topic?
Sure, Fran, and Sherry, thank you for the comments. I think you said a lot of things that resonate with me, especially about sort of the sustainability of the work that we do. And the idea of the weight of history, right? History is part of our institutional cultures. Most of us brag about the history of our institutions. When we examine it deeper, then we see the shortcomings and we have to sort of live with that. So when I think about, inclusive communities, to me, it's really about the idea of making the conversation something that all people can embrace. I'm in the state of Texas, and it's a little different political environment in Massachusetts. And one of the things we have to constantly think about, how do we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in a way that doesn't either have people saying that doesn't involve me or you're pitching a certain political perspective. And what we've often used is just the concept of maximizing human potential, right? Every single individual in our institutional space is a valued member, is an important member, has incredible contributions to make. If we have an environment that is welcoming, that is embracing of all those different identities, then we get to maximize and hear all of those great ideas and benefit from those contributions. And I think Sherry's point about inclusive excellence is so important. We are actually saying that our excellence is tied to our diversity, right? We can't be excellent if we don't maximize and have access to that. Without it, we're limited. We can bring perspectives from one side of the world or one side of a community, but unless we have all those working in concert, then we don't really have something that's truly incredible. In fact, a lot of research has been done recently on diversity in organizations makes that point. Problem solving, moving towards solutions, those kinds of things all seem to work better in diverse communities. And I think something about, the way we do the work is important too, because the work is often left on the shoulders of BIPOC and other minoritized communities, right? And so the important thing is to think about, well, how do we ensure and create a restorative and renewable resistance sort of space where it's not just people who typically and historically have carried the weight doing the work, but it becomes the work of everybody in the organization.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Rich, for that framing. And Stephanie, a slightly different angle on this. If you can share with us, how do these efforts really become authentic, to become rooted across, down, and through every part of the organization? Is that even possible? Can we do this?
I think it's possible. I think that's why we're here, because we believe it's possible. And there are lots of strategies, and I so appreciate what both my colleagues have already offered in this space. You've touched on so many important aspects already. I think one key component of authenticity is ensuring that that the organization doesn't sort of bypass the process of self-discovery. Rich alluded to this. We talked about understanding the history. We both actually spoke a lot about historical context. I think it's really like human nature to want to bypass that process and really get to the work, right? There's a tremendous sense of urgency. We know that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and people are highly motivated and eager to make changes at this point. And in that, there can be a tendency not to really first do the self-discovery work, to really understand who you have been as an organization. I love the comment Sherry made about the Harvard that we can be. And there's, great light and hope in that. But in order to become the organization that you want to be and that we believe we can be, it's important to really sort of spend time listening and learning the truth about who we are currently and who we have been historically. And as I said before, it's human nature to want to bypass that process, because doing that is painful. It's hard work. But that's sort of the evidence, right? You can't come up, James Baldwin says, and this is repeated 100,000 times now, that not everything faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And so I think it's really important not to leapfrog into the getting about setting up strategy and interventions and so forth, but to really dig deep to understand first, how is your organization not inclusive? How is your field? I'm in psychology, so we've been thinking a lot about the field of psychology and medicine. What have we done to really, uplift and create inclusivity versus create more barriers? And the truth of that is really painful. It's really ugly. But it is in first understanding and learning that then we can build upon the next part of the process. And so to get to your question more specifically, approach that really leaning heavily on is the model of shared responsibility. And shared responsibility means that the work rests with everyone, that everyone, it's not Sherry's job, it's not Rich's job, it's not the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, or Belonging. The work isn't buried, it's not marginalized, it's not fractured, right? It is truly integrated, and it's everyone's responsibility. And people take ownership and pride in feeling that. It's like no one's exempt from doing this work, right? But in not being exempt, like it's not like a burden that it's all on all of us. It's seen as like a brilliant opportunity, that when that model of shared responsibility gets really embraced by an organization, it's incredible, because as Rich mentioned, we're moving away from what has historically been done, which is that this work is tagged on as someone's additional, volunteer work, where burdening historically marginalized or rising identities within our community to do the heavy lifting. But in the shared responsibility model, everyone in the organization understands they have a very specific and important and critical role in creating a more inclusive organization.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. And let me, I want to sort of now go in reverse order because Stephanie, I heard you very clearly the call for institutions to first, before they jump to action, right, to do the work of self-discovery. Can you talk about, so that is a practice in and of itself. Are there any examples that you'd like to call out as a model of that, or maybe not explicitly, but your call on that? And then I'd like to also talk about some of the practices that we've seen beyond that on campuses that have been successful.
Sure, there are some excellent examples. Like one example that probably most people are familiar with is creating something like a listening tour. But that can take many shapes and sizes. There is a tremendous amount that goes into the logistics of creating a successful listening tour. And a successful listening tour at its foundation is a space in which people feel that it's safe enough. People will never feel 100% safe, but that we create the conditions where people feel that it's safe enough, that they can be brave enough to come forward to share the truth of their lived, observed, and in some instances, supervised experiences regarding identity, race, for example, sex, gender, all aspects of social cultural identity within the organization, where people feel the truth, that they can share the truth of their lived experiences. In order to, one foundation for a successful sort of listening tour is to make sure that members of the organization, because it can be very anxiety provoking, it's a hard thing to do, it's a hard thing to do well. But it's important to make sure that the members of your organization are prepared to listen and to listen effectively. And so one model for that is a construct we've been training people on and talking and writing about a lot, and that's teaching people the contrast between oppressive versus empowering listening, so that as we are hoping to create and moving toward becoming more inclusive and across the organization, that people are prepared to hear when people courageously step forward to share the truth of their experiences. And in that hearing, empowering listening is a very specific kind of skill set that we are teaching people how to do. We're teaching them what it looks like in contrast to oppressive listening. We all are guilty of oppressive listening behaviors. They happen to be behaviors that, as leaders, as people in academia, we often get rewarded for. We often get promoted because we demonstrate these behaviors, like being able to come up with quick solutions. We talk fast. We hear a problem, we can jump in there and problem solve. We can get into fix-it mode. We do a lot of talking. Might have a commanding presence in a space and so forth. And in certain organizational settings, those behaviors are maybe what we want in our colleagues. But where people are coming forward to talk about experience of marginalization, oppression, bias, these behaviors are experienced as oppressive and they shut down conversation. So it's important to begin to develop the skill set that allows you to suppress those behaviors, again, that we're all likely to engage in, and instead move into empowered listening skills, which focuses on empowering the speaker. And the focus goes from the listener and remains on the speaker instead.
Great, thank you. That is very helpful. Now let me turn back to Rich and Sherry. If each of you wouldn't mind sharing just a couple of examples of success stories of what's gone well on your campuses to share with our audience.
Sure. And Stephanie, thank you for the reminder about the importance of listening and how we listen. I think it's a really key part. Like saying I'm listening is not the same thing as actually listening, right? So I'll just talk about the University of Texas at Austin. So for the last several years, we've worked closely with and I want to talk about the experience from the faculty side of things. So when you think about nurturing an inclusive and a diverse community, it often starts with who is comprised of your faculty, right? Historically, we've often had struggles with that. The professoriate in the United States is incredibly white, especially when you get to the tenured positions and the full professor positions, right? So we've been doing implicit bias training for quite some time, and the search committee is where it all happens, right? Think about all the dynamics that happen in a search committee. Who speaks in the search committee first? Who can say or make comments or even posit certain things about, collegiality and fit that really turn conversations a different direction. And so we've been training our search committees, initially just the search committee chairs, but now the entire committees in my College of Education, we do that. So all our entire committee gets to go through a training and learns the demographics and learns about things like, what do the pipelines look like? Like, let's actually talk about the survey of earned doctorates and see how many people, people of color, women people, and so on and so forth that are actually in the pool before we say it's hard to find people from this background because ... The other thing that's really important about this process is that we do role plays. We actually take scenarios and we walk through them. Like, this happens in a search process. What would you do? And we don't posit this is the right solution or the wrong solution, though we do have people to help us. Well, if you say that thing, that's actually going to cause a problem. That's not legal. But we actually ask the committees to sit there and grapple with these difficulties. Something like gender inclusive bathrooms, which is something that people often don't think about. But if we don't have access to all those spaces on campus, what is it like for a candidate who would like to have access to a gender inclusive bathroom, right? And so bringing these scenarios to life and having people grapple with them in a brave and courageous environment where it's not quote unquote live fire is a much more conducive and healthy way to walk through these situations instead of things happening, right? One thing that's been really productive is people talking about experiences they had as candidates themselves at other institutions. And a lot of times you won't believe the sexism, homophobia, transphobia, racism that people experience. And it's important that people to share those things because we don't want to be in the process of replicating those kinds of behaviors. But it's been a very, I think, courageous and interesting conversation to have with colleagues because this idea of institutional humility is very important, right? And I think, Stephanie, you really nailed that. The way that we progress in our field of endeavor is by being certain and by being, the highest standards of rigor and so on and so forth, and rarely acknowledging when we get things wrong or we don't understand something or admitting that we haven't done a good job in certain ways. So a lot of that is just sort of letting that go and really thinking intently about how do we make sure that every single individual that interacts with our institution, regardless if they are successfully named the final candidate, has an experience where they can say the University of Texas at Austin is a place where I can see why it's such a wonderful place to work because, people are able to be their full authentic selves versus I had to suppress some part of my identity because I didn't think it was safe to do so. So, I mean, and that's something that takes a lot of effort. It comes from the top. And I think all the efforts about talking about institutional commitments, presidents, provosts, deans, faculty leaders, staff members have to be pushing in the same direction. And those people have to follow the rhetoric with actual concrete actions. And so that's something I think that's been effective. And we're still working at it. I'm not making a claim that we have figured it all out, but I'm really admire the beautiful struggle we're going through in doing this work because I think it's made a huge impact so far.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Rich. Sherry, how about at Harvard?
Yeah, so this is it's always a fun question when people ask me, what's happening at Harvard, because Harvard is, when you ask that question, is really which Harvard. There are, all of our schools have their own unique identities. And so in many ways, there are many Harvards. And I say that as someone who just joined the organization 15 months ago. And I am regularly recognizing that this is, from the outside, you sort of see the forest. inside we see nothing but trees. So I say that at the outset to say that, part of the work that we're doing is trying to create a structure that allows us to think more strategically about how we're going to point all of our arrows as an institution, leveraging, I think, all of our different skills together. So, someone, I think in the chat asked a question about the benefits of diversity. And I often joke that if any place can get it right, it should be Harvard, because we have effectively 13 different petri dishes to work in terms of different cultural environments, right? And so we can test things out, we can figure out what works, we can figure out what doesn't work. And I often joke with folks, when we discover a hard problem and say, we should pretend that we're Harvard. What would Harvard do? I mean, how would Harvard solve this problem if you could marshal all of the resources that they have at their disposal, right? Which raises the question, what are the resources that we have at our disposal? So we are, I mentioned that because what we are trying to leverage is, given all of the different environments, the strengths that we have relative to law and education and medicine and healthcare, how can we think about Harvard's role, not only in the world, but also within higher education and here on our campus, and think about how we bring all of those tools to bear to solve to contribute to solving not only the world's problems, but our own. So we're really trying to focus structurally on thinking about how we get all of our arrows to move in the same direction. I wanted to start my comments there and also really end my comments there because it underscores something that I think we know is a problem, which is many institutions struggle to identify what the goals are. So when you ask me, what does success look like? Or give me an example of something that is a successful piece. It really depends on the localized environment. And our problems are not everyone else's problems. Our problems are not necessarily that we don't have the resources. Our problem is, in many ways, not even that we struggle with demographic diversity in every aspect of our schools and colleges. Some of our schools and our college in particular is actually pretty diverse. And we've done a lot in terms of economic access that is uneven across the institution. And so we're working to think about how we can leverage some of the things that are working really well in some of those local environments and help take those lessons and spread them in other local environments. We are working to develop our connective tissue here as an institution. And so, I'll give an example that is on some level highly satisfying to me because I consider myself a bit of an architect, but maybe not so sexy to other people, which is, this year we really started focusing on getting everyone to think in their multi-year financial planning about how diversity and inclusion is going to factor into the budget planning process. That's huge as an institution, right? Because it allows us to really think about how we're going to dedicate our resources to this. So that's on the macro level. On a micro level, we're really, our office, for example, has funded several hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of grants for members of our community who have diversity, inclusion, culture change projects through our Harvard Culture Lab Innovation Fund grant system to join us as partners. And so I use these two examples of sort of how we're using our financial resources because it's an important indicator of our commitment to the work and the way that we're enlisting our partners in our distributed model for leadership. This is not about creating a better space for them, right? For those people who might be marginalized. This is about building our Harvard, right? Our community. And so that means that everyone has to not only be tasked, but resourced and empowered to do that. And so we're really, really excited about, thinking about, thinking structurally in that way about how we can really equip ourselves to make advances in diversity and inclusion and belonging long term.
These are some excellent examples that you're raising. So I'm just aware that we have 2 minutes left. So I want to do, and a lot of the questions I see that audience members have come up with have in part been answered. But let me ask one, and like literally 30 seconds each if you can, but how do you hold executive level administrators accountable for the work that's taking place across the campus?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I did see that question pop up, and I think it's about, again, institutional commitment. So it really starts at the top. What is the president saying? What is the provost? What are the board of directors saying about this? Right. So a lot of times we've been content seeing DEIB worked in a small office. Stephanie made this point earlier, but the really important thing is the institutional commitment has to come from the absolute top. And folks who work in institutions where you're not hearing that, you need to talk to the people who lead the institution and ask them, what are our priorities? I made a comment about Sherry's point about budgets. Budgets are often where you get to see the priorities. And if that language is being, 2020 was a year where people said a lot of things. 2021 and 2022 will be years where people are asked to enact the things they said. And it's going to come because people have committed to the work. And that means that boards of directors and presidents and provosts and deans will be assessed on their progress towards that goal. And I think we have to be knowledgeable with the fact that nobody's going to make, nuclear progress in one year, but let's start charting how we advance. And there's lots of places to do that work and to get advice how to do that work. But that's what I think. Institutional leadership matters.
All right, Sherry, Stephanie, you got like 30 seconds. You want to chime in a little bit more, or what do you think?
I'll go really quickly. I mean, I think, commitment starts from the top. And it has to be clear to everyone that this is going to be something that we are going to be evaluated on. I think our leader, our president, has made that very clear. And so it means that all of us in senior leadership are trying to build our shared accountability and motivated to build our shared accountability because we know it's an expectation. And that trickles down through the ranks. That's how you get cultural change.
Well, I want to thank Stephanie and Sherry and Rich so much for joining us, for your very clear ideas coming out that I think are extremely useful, and I hope this work continues on. For those of you who joined us, thank you so very much for taking the time. You'll see a slide up with some of our key takeaways. You can also go to our website and find some more resources there that we referred to this afternoon. So again, thank you everybody for joining us, and I hope everybody has a good rest of their day. Take care now.
Thanks, Fran. Thanks, Sherry. Thanks,
Thank
Stephanie.
you. Thank you.